Welcome to History for Nap Time. Tonight, we'll explore something unusual, something about medieval life that might surprise you. Most people today think of sleep as one long stretch. You go to bed, you sleep for 7 or 8 hours, and you wake up. But in the Middle Ages, villagers didn't sleep this way. Instead, they slept in segments. They had what was called a first sleep and a second sleep, with a waking period in between. During this time, people prayed, talked, worked quietly, even visited neighbors. It might sound strange, but in fact, it was perfectly normal for centuries. In this episode, we'll step into the medieval village, into its houses and routines, to understand why people never slept straight through the night, and what they did instead. To understand medieval sleep, we need to first imagine daily life. Most villagers lived in small wooden or stone houses, often with thatched roofs. A single room might serve as kitchen, bedroom, and living space for the whole family. A fire burned in the hearth, not only for cooking, but to keep away the cold. Workdays were long and physical. People rose with the sun, worked in the fields, tended animals, and did household tasks from dawn to dusk. Light came from candles, rushlights, or the fire, dim compared to our electric bulbs. When night fell, the village grew dark and quiet. Darkness itself shaped how people thought of time and sleep. Without clocks, their rhythms followed nature, sunrise, sunset, and the moon. Sleep wasn't about counting 8 hours. It was about resting when the body and the sky told you to. Historians have found countless references to the medieval pattern of segmented sleep. People would go to bed soon after nightfall, sleeping for perhaps 4 hours. This was their first sleep. Then they would wake, often around midnight, and stay awake for an hour or two. Afterward, they returned to bed for their second sleep, lasting until dawn. This wasn't rare, it was the norm. We know it from diaries, court records, even literature. In Geoffrey Chaucer's works, characters mention first sleep. In 15th century medical texts, physicians recommended what to do between sleeps. The Bible itself contains passages suggesting nighttime waking for prayer. In this waking period, people did many things. Some prayed, believing the hours after midnight were sacred. Others talked quietly with family, told stories, or tended the fire. Farmers sometimes went outside to check on animals. Couples used the time for intimacy. It was a flexible, accepted rhythm of life, one that seems strange only because we have forgotten it. There were many reasons medieval villagers didn't sleep in one long block. First, light and darkness. With no artificial lighting, evenings were short. People often went to bed earlier than we do today. Going to bed soon after sunset meant they naturally woke in the middle of the night. Second, the body's natural rhythm. Modern science shows that when people live without artificial light, they often fall into this segmented sleep pattern. The brain releases melatonin earlier. People wake naturally after a few hours and then return to sleep. Third, safety and fire. In a world lit by open flames, someone needed to check the hearth, add fuel, or make sure sparks didn't catch. Night waking had a practical purpose. And finally, culture and religion. Night was not simply for sleep. It was a time for prayer, reflection, and quiet tasks. Medieval people believed the midnight hours were a time when the soul was especially close to God. What happened during that midnight interval? It depended on the household. Some people prayed. Manuals of devotion even included special prayers after your first sleep. Priests and monks often scheduled night offices, midnight services, aligning with this natural waking. Others did small chores. A woman might mend clothing by firelight. A man might sharpen tools. Couples often used the time for intimacy. Doctors of the era even recommended it, saying conception was more likely after first sleep, when the body was rested but not yet sluggish. Neighbors sometimes visited one another, especially in winter, when nights were long. Imagine walking through a quiet village, lantern in hand, knocking at a friend's door, not because of an emergency, but simply because it was the natural time to talk. Children, too, were awake. Parents told them stories, shared dreams, or calmed fears. So the night was not silent. It was filled with a softer rhythm, one of prayer, whispers, fire crackling, and footsteps in the dark. This pattern of first and second sleep isn't guesswork. Historians like Roger E. Kirch have documented hundreds of references. In court records from the Middle Ages, witnesses speak of crimes happening after the first sleep. In medical texts, physicians give advice on what to do between sleeps. In diaries, people casually mention their first sleep, as if it were ordinary. Even great literature remembers it. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in French poems, and in sermons, first sleep appears as a common phrase. What's striking is that people didn't feel the need to explain it. It was so normal they assumed everyone understood. For medieval villagers, night was not just darkness. It was a spiritual time. The hours after midnight were believed to be sacred. Monks rose to sing night prayers, believing the soul was closer to heaven in those still hours. Lay people imitated this with private prayers. But there were also fears. Night was thought to be the time when witches and spirits were strongest. Dreams were seen as messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from the devil. Waking in the night gave people a chance to reflect, to ward off evil with prayer, or to interpret their visions. So segmented sleep was not just practical. It was woven into the fabric of belief. Not everyone experienced the night the same way. Wealthier households, with more candles and servants, could afford to stay awake later. They might push their bedtime closer to midnight and shorten the waking interval. But for most villagers, with little light beyond the fire, early bedtime and segmented sleep were standard. In noble households, the midnight waking might include reading, discussion, or even feasting. In peasant cottages, it was quieter, mending tools, sharing stories, or simply tending the animals. The rhythm, however, was shared. Across classes, first and second sleep were part of daily life. Why did this pattern fade away? The answer lies in the rise of artificial light. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as candles became cheaper and oil lamps improved, people began staying awake later. Coffee houses opened, cities lit their streets, and people pushed bedtime closer to midnight. With a later bedtime, there was no longer a natural waking in the middle of the night. Sleep compressed into one block. By the Industrial Revolution, segmented sleep was forgotten, replaced by the expectation of an unbroken 8 hours. Today, when people struggle with insomnia or wake in the middle of the night, they often think something is wrong. In truth, their bodies may be echoing an older rhythm, the same rhythm that guided medieval villagers for centuries. Modern experiments support this. When volunteers live without artificial light, their sleep often divides into 2 segments, with a calm waking in between. They report feeling peaceful, reflective, not anxious. In a way, medieval villagers were simply following nature. Their segmented sleep was not a disorder, but a healthy rhythm shaped by light, darkness, and culture. Perhaps our ancestors were closer to the natural flow of time than we are today. So why did medieval villagers never sleep straight through the night? because their world was darker, quieter, and more in tune with the sun and moon, because their bodies followed rhythms we have forgotten, because night was not only for sleep, but for prayer, intimacy, and quiet work. First sleep and second sleep were part of their lives, as ordinary as breakfast or bedtime stories. Today, when we wake in the night, we might see it as a problem, but in the Middle Ages, it was simply life. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of medieval sleep. This has been History for Nap Time. May your own sleep tonight, whether in one block or two, be calm and restful.